Now, let's look at the specific dimensions of the classic or more perfect models that Aaron Leithart has delineated between majoritarian and consensus government. And in his book on the choice between these systems, he identifies the United Kingdom as a classic instance of relatively pure majoritarian democracy, but of course recently it's resulted in a power-sharing coalition, and Belgium, or we could have identified the Netherlands, as a case of more pure consensus government. How do these two models differ? Keep in mind, one veers toward decisiveness and another towards inclusion and the diffusion of power. So first we have the dimension of whether one party will be dominating and ruling for a period of time, not indefinitely. You have power concentrated in a single party ruling in the executive branch of government. The alternative in the consensus model is power sharing in a grand coalition. Now keep in mind that you can have coherent one-party rule both in a presidential system, where in the executive branch you elect a president, he brings in his own party, and that's the party that's ruling until that party is voted out of power in a presidential election. Or it can be in a parliamentary government. So the first option of one-party cabinets can happen either in a parliamentary or a presidential system. Executive power sharing is much more common in a parliamentary system, particularly one with lots of political parties in parliament, where government cannot be formed without a coalition, particularly if you want a majority government. However, in a presidential system, if the president and his party are elected with only a small minority of seats in the Congress, this may give an incentive to a politically smart and adept president to bring other parties into his presidential administration, into his cabinet, not because it's constitutionally required, but because he and his party are not going to be able to pass legislation for the 4 or 5 years or whatever it might be of the presidential term without doing so. And indeed, this informal level of power sharing, of bringing other parties into a presidential administration to create viable congressional majorities, has been the recent norm in Brazil and has helped to create a situation where the uneasy combination, as I will explain, between a presidential system and a multi-party system with lots of different parties has been able to work more efficiently. The second dimension of difference between a majoritarian model and a consensus model has to do with the fusion versus the separation of powers. And now we see that in one sense, a parliamentary system may actually have at least the potential to be more majoritarian than a presidential system. Because in a parliamentary system, there is what's called cabinet dominance. And the parliamentary majority really is also the executive majority, whether it's a coalition or a single party. And it's very rare in a parliamentary system and can be a simple deal breaker for the government to lose a vote. And indeed, the government in a parliamentary system can specify that an important matter before the parliament becomes a vote of no confidence. If they don't adopt the government's position, the cabinet's position, the government falls. Whereas in a presidential system, there are independent powers for the Congress and the president. And the president cannot simply will his way to legislation simply because even he has a majority in Congress, his own party may defy him. And of course, there's plenty of opportunity for a different political party in the Congress to control one, or if it's a bicameral legislature, both houses of the national legislature. So this can create more diffusion of power in a presidential system than we may see in a parliamentary system. Now keep again, majoritarian model is always toward concentrating power, making government decisive. Consensus model toward diffusing power, making government slower but more inclusive and deliberative. So the third variable is the structure of the legislature. Is it unicameral or bicameral? If it's bicameral, do each of the houses of the national legislature, the parliament, the Congress, the National Assembly, whatever it's called, do they have roughly similar powers, or is one house much stronger than the other? If there's a unicameral legislature, there's only one house of parliament. Or if there is what we call an asymmetric bicameral legislature, like the parliament in the United Kingdom, where there's a House of Commons and a House of Lords, but the House of Lords cannot do anything more than delay legislation. Really, it's the House of Commons that's decisive. Or similarly in India with the Lok Sabha, the lower house, and then I believe it's called the Raj Sabha, the upper house, is really only a much weaker and less consequential body. Power is concentrated in the Indian lower house of Parliament. Not surprisingly, as a former British colony, we see here constitutional respects in which many of them India is copying the British model at the time of independence. So with a unicameral legislature or an asymmetric bicameral legislature, power tends to be more concentrated. When you have two houses of a National Assembly, each with relatively, if not identical, then relatively balanced powers, you have the possibility that different parties may control, or different coalitions of parties may control the two different branches, and the more that the two different houses of Parliament, the more the two houses of Parliament are equal in their powers, the more this diffuses power. Next variable, the structure of the party system. Do we have two parties or many parties? And again, when I say two parties or many parties, I'm talking about, in the technical political science sense, relevant parties. Parties that are large enough in their share of the vote and large enough in their presence in the parliament to be able to affect the formation of a cabinet in a parliamentary system, or the ability of a ruling party or a dominant party in a house of the legislature to pass legislation. And what percentage of the seats in the National Assembly does it take to be relevant? Well, that depends on how fine the balance is between the parties. 5% may not matter very much if one party has 65% and the other 30%. But if you've got two political parties, each with about 43% of the vote, and then a number of smaller parties, even 2 or 3% of the seats in a House of Congress may matter a great deal. So when you have pretty much a two-party system, that is a product of, as we'll see in a minute in the electoral system, but also a contributor to a majoritarian dynamic. You got basically two parties that account for all or virtually all of the seats in the Congress or Parliament, and one of them is going to be in the majority and one of them is going to be in minority. Now, if there are only two parties and there's only one House of Parliament, then you can see how that is likely to produce a majority, logically. But if there are multiple political parties, or even just a bicameral legislature, then there's more likelihood of multiple political parties being politically powerful or consequential. And the more you have multiple elements here, the more you get truly diffused power, the need of different actors to come together. Smaller political actors matter. You have the consensus model of government. By the same token, we can ask the question, is there a one-dimensional party system or a multi-dimensional party system? If the party system is configured on a single dimension, ideology, left-right, it's at least easier to form coalitions. You go out from the middle, which is probably where the larger parties are going to lie, and you reach a little one way or the other toward the extremes or the more ideologically committed parties to get your coalition partners. Or in Germany, you have a party to the left, the Social Democrats, a party to the right, the Christian Democrats. You reach perhaps in the middle for the Free Democrats, for the coalition partner that can lean one way or the other. That makes coalition formation obviously simpler and may somewhat minimize the number of coalition partners a predominant political party needs in a parliamentary system to form a government. But if you have multiple dimensions of identity or affiliation that shape the party system, so in Israel, it may be left-right, it may be attitudes on territories, it may be attitudes on religious versus secular, on economic issues between people who want a more protecting state in the social sense and people who want a more libertarian state. It gets much more complicated to form a coalition government, and again, you are more likely to move in the direction of consensus.